And I also want to say I've seen some comments out and about that go something like this: yet another monitoring report, not reasonable progress. There is so much progress in this report.
John.
If we're on to the motion of whether it's in compliance or not, I guess what I would argue is that it's in compliance with exception for points 1, 4, 6, and 8. And I would say that because on points 1, 4, and 6, we don't have indicators that we thought were sufficient. And without sufficient indicators, I think it's awful hard to say that we have adequate evidence of compliance with the report. And just moving numerically in order, points 6 and 8, we don't have the language of the interpretation sufficient to be held in compliance, and therefore, as a starting point, I would suggest if you don't have the language there, it's awful hard to say that we have sufficient indicators or thresholds or evidence to say that those pieces are in compliance. So, again, in summary, I would say that it's in compliance except for points 1, 4, 6, and 8.
Okay, but in all honesty, I mean, that's half of the report. So we have
I
to
hear
get
you.
to a point where you either say no or
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
And
I get what John's trying to do, though. He's
I
trying
do.
To, yeah.
I understand, and I'm totally
Yeah,
with
please
that.
state your
I
argument.
agree with
Yep.
that. I totally agree with
Hear
that.
you. Yep.
It's not that anybody wants to shoot anybody down, but I think going yes and no and then adding half the report is saying it needs to come back. I question the validity of the whole process if we're doing that. I don't know.
But
I don't know.
but
I understand.
if you kind of wait, if you wait, I'm waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Waiting. Yeah.
Waiting.
Meaning, yeah, I know the indicators need a little more clarity,
Sure.
but I think it's there.
Sure.
So even though we say 10, 6, 4, and 1 need a little more modification,
Right,
I
but
can get by that.
I understand that, but isn't that on the technicalities of wording that you like or don't like? I guess that's the whole point of voting for compliance, or that probably shouldn't be the only reason for voting compliance or non-compliance. You got to look at the total picture. But I guess my issue is that, you know, if work needs to be done, work needs to be done. So how do we address that when it comes to be part of half of a report? What's the right option? What's the right avenue to take? It's one thing if you have in compliance exception of 10.3, but if you now have 10, 1, 3, 4, 6, 8, if you want to make exceptions, now maybe we don't want to concur with John on the exception piece, which would be another motion that would have to be made, but I was just arguing probably against his motion because I think in mentioning half the report as being exceptions, we're
That's
kind
where
of
the waiting
defeating
argument comes in.
ourselves.
Where's the waiting comes in.
Mhm.
I understand.
Well, and there's also a part of it's. So how do you recognize the stuff that is working well?
Right.
So it's sort of a glass half full, glass half empty.
Exactly. So
Um,
where should the board go with that as a board is what I'm asking for direction.
Well, and I would say, I understand, I hear what you're all saying. It's not that it's the entirety of 1, 4, 6, and 8, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
It's nuances
Right.
throughout those, and so I would argue that the vast majority of the report is in compliance,
Mhm.
and we've already called out the areas that are issues, and yes, some lead to others, like you were saying, John, you know, well, if the interpretation isn't spot on, then how can we say the rest flows properly? Yet from the discussion, we can see that the understanding is there.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, it's not all of these components that need work. It's small pieces of those components from my view.
Yes.
So with
So I would
that,
lean towards the yes with the exceptions.
So with that, in my understanding of what John said, is you said in compliance with the exception of 10.1, 10.6, 10.8,
And 4.
and
10.2.
10.4.
Yep.
And
Sorry, I wrote
3,
it in.
10.3 is
Well,
3 is
already
included.
claimed.
Right.
Yep, 3's already stated.
So with those notations and comments, so you've moved that.
I would move that as an amendment to the original motion, which the original motion was we accept this report as in compliance.
Okay.
So
As in compliance as asserted by.
exactly as asserted by administration.
So we're voting on his amendment right now to add all
We
the
would
others
be on
as
the
exceptions?
amendment.
Right.
Yes. Why are
we adding that as an amendment when we didn't do any of the other ones?
Yeah.
Why aren't we just saying yes, no, exceptions?
Well,
and then we make a vote on the whole motion with all these exceptions
Right.
listed.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what
So I don't
was
think that's a
thinking.
motion, I think John's just saying, I think.
Okay, so then
1, 4,
we're
6
voting on the motion to accept the report as asserted by
No, we first
administration
need to
with.
decide whether or not we agree that 1, 4, 10, and 6, or whatever.
1, 4, 6, and
1,
8.
4, 6, whatever he said, if we agree that those are not in compliance. So we'd say yes with compliance, and those is an exception, just like we did all the other ones. We either as a board agree or we don't, and then it is. And then we vote on the motion, which is to accept the report with all this other stuff that we've talked about. That's how I thought it went.
Got it.
Because I don't think you could just vote at the very end about one piece.
Right,
So-
so we're no longer
All
gonna,
of
you're
that is an
saying,
amendment.
John, and are we taking yours?
Yes.
You're being taken as an amendment.
no, he is just making an exception on the in compliance line.
What Melissa just said is right.
Correct.
Basically, all of these other things we've done up until now
You guys just
is an
put down
amendment.
as an amendment,
Right.
So you just
Yes.
amended the motion.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
As
With
we went
those
along.
As we went along.
Right.
Okay.
So now, right.
I think you just
Okay.
want to vote up or down.
And so
Right.
John, first of all, we
Based on
have
the
to do
exceptions and
John.
the comments.
Yes.
Thank
voted.
you.
For the
Thank
incompliance.
Sorry.
But John was asking for the in
Yes.
compliance
Yes.
line to have, in addition to
Exceptions.
10.3, 10.1.4.6.8, based on the fact that
Right.
they appear most frequently above in the exception
they've already
lines on
been
all the
noted.
others.
Well, what's been noted is
Is-
that they lack sufficient information, or that they don't have an indicator. What I am suggesting is that because of those things, they can't be in compliance because we don't have those factors to assert that it is in compliance.
You can't know
We don't
that.
have adequate information or evidence to say it is in compliance. So I'm asserting because of those defects, if you will,
And then we vote on the entire report as it's been, quote-unquote, amended with our comments along the way. So then we make one, and we either say yep, and then if it's a yes as a board, we have all those comments and feedback that we've given them. If we say no, then I don't know what the heck that means.
and we need a motion for that.
Okay.
As to
So,
what we do accept or don't accept, I guess.
with the understanding that the notations that have preceded in the discussion are already on there as amendments or comments, and then John is asserting that,
No, we still have to agree on that.
Yeah, we still
Before
have to
can
agree
move
on that.
forward
so,
with the vote on
so I
the
need a
whole thing.
consensus on the, from the
Right.
board in terms of, as it relates to compliance for 1, 4, 6, and 8.
Right.
So I'm there.
I
I'm
agree
there.
with John's argument.
I would agree only the 10.1.
Renee?
I'm stuck because then
Right.
my issue is if we say that all of those are not in
Right.
compliance, then,
Then you vote no.
yeah, I would like to vote yes for this report, but I don't see how I can vote yes for a report overall that we've just said half of it's not in compliance in our view as a board.
Yeah, I get it.
So that's my issue.
So what do you want to do?
And I get over that by knowing that it's nuances, it's not the entire
Right.
10.1, 10.4,
I guess what I'd like to do
10.6.
then is just skip, I'd like
Right.
to make a friendly amendment to John's that we don't or include specifically any additional ones as a blanket in the in compliance line.
You're asking to
And
withdraw
I
this
would
amendment?
concur.
Yeah.
He didn't have an amendment, it's just a comment.
And I
Because
would
it's- because
concur
it's
with
stated
Renee.
above.
You want to withdraw
Because
your
it's stated
comments?
above, unless we feel strongly about one
I just wanna
particular,
clarify
like
what you
Chuck said, he
suggested
would
first.
support 10.1. I'm fine with noting that 1 because it appeared most
Right.
obviously above would be, but I'm not
Would you
in
entertain a
support of all of
motion
them.
to amend the report to make an exception for 10.1 and 10.3?
No,
Three's
because then
already
we're adding
I
covered.
on
know,
again.
but an amendment covering just 10.1.
So what I would hope that if you
Yeah.
can just state that in the affirmative,
we do.
what you want.
You don't
I would
have-
accept the report as stated with the following additional exception that 10.1 is out of compliance.
On the compliance line.
Right.
Yeah,
You want people to vote on 10.1 and 10.3,
yeah,
which
that's
is
all I would
already
do.
there.
Yep,
The
Yep,
addition of 10.1.
okay.
right,
On the in compliance line.
right.
I would concur with that.
Is there concurrence around 10.1?
Sure.
Okay.
That's the overarching, so, I mean, in a lot
Okay,
of ways.
with that, and with my understanding of all of the pieces that have been noted above, the motion has been moved and seconded with comments and exceptions and amendments. So with that, related to the motion to accept with those notations, all those in favor signify by
Wait,
saying.
Eric, can you just hang on, because we're working on this, and I have not heard a word you said. So
We just want to make sure we get the motion straight,
I want to
right?
make sure that this
Yep.
is really.
Okay, yep.
Okay, so-
10-1 and 10-3.
10-1 per the board, 10-3 per admin.
It might be helpful for Brenda to read what she has, so that we're
Yep.
sure we're all on the same page. No?
So we can keep in track. We don't have a motion, all we've got is
Okay, all right,
the
just the
cover sheet.
elements.
We're just having, that's all we have at this point is we
Okay.
wanted to make sure we got all the elements in place.
So the motion is to accept it as stated.
No, we got to make an amendment,
Basically,
What, to add 10
or just to accept it,
No.
as stated on the cover sheet.
Yeah.
No, just to accept it.
Yeah.
We
just
don't have to
Very
make an
good.
amendment. We
Yeah,
don't have
good.
to make an
Yep.
amendment.
I get it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so as captured on the cover sheet,
yes.
So adeptly.
the motion to approve, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, it's 8:20 right now.
Thank you.
Carol?
Yeah.
Wait,
Oh, God.
we wanted some comments, I thought.
Comments?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yep,
I'm
okay.
sorry, but
Yes.
we've been keeping track of what those are.
Comment.
Always.
Run for the hills.
Well, he's going through that. Can I just make a general comment, Carol? I just really want to say to everybody who's worked on this report, I appreciate all the work that went into it. I know there's a lot of hard effort, and a lot of good work here. So I really want to say thank you, and I hope that you're not discouraged by our discussion, okay? I really do. So thank you for your work.
And I just want to note that Dr. West stayed in the front. Well, he actually went to the back at one point, but he did manage to make it through his first monitoring report.
That was it, right there.
I was hanging up.
He did fall asleep.
The
Yeah.
comments are
I make a
10.5 with comments under indicators, and under thresholds was just, we wanted a comment about having more targets.
A general
General.
Yes.
comment under thresholds that better targets and specific
Right, so-
results need to
And
be.
and then the final was that if the American Indian,
Okay, you gotta slow down, because then we're never gonna get these tonight. Is that right?
I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. If it's less than 85%, you will appropriately modify management's compliance response.
Get that .04
Way to go, Jeff.
person somewhere and complete them.
Okay, so
I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, so the comments are under 10.5, we would like, what do we want? No, that's different.
I have no idea.
You know
at
the
this
power
point.
of truncation, right?
I do.
As an IT and all the war stories.
So that was the instructional time, what would it put that?
Disruptions to learning and instructional guidelines, or
Right, that was-
guidelines on
so what was
videos.
Okay, we need to tighten this up because we,
I don't know.
yeah. No, I'm just trying to capture who's on first.
Well, we're trying to figure out what the comment was that we wrote that we wanted to come back to on 10.5.
Okay.
So if anybody has recollection of what that comment was gonna be, speak now or for.
I have nothing on 10.5.
No say.
Well,
That was about the field trips and stuff, so so were we gonna add a comment about
I thought you took.
describing it? Well, we don't wanna include a field trip under an indicator that says it's a disruption to learning. So I think that was the comment.
Okay.
comment was the board values
Field trips,
appropriate field trips.
right.
I have that there's evidence in the indicators.
There's evidence in the indicators.
You want evidence, yes, there is evidence. in the
That's another
indicators.
comment.
Okay.
Right, okay. And then there was the one about,
The overarching comment on the thresholds.
It was the one about the video use guidelines.
that was part of 10.5 too. Then there was one, then there was one under 10, under at thresholds, we decided to say yes, but we wanted to add a comment about needing more targets. So just a general
More
comment.
stakes in the ground.
More stakes in the ground, right. So that's it.
Either adding targets or moving targets.
We'll just-
From.
All right.
We did
Yeah,
get it.
the indicators
You got-
were not
From one to the
sufficient.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Thresholds.
some of the targets are in the report, just in the
Right.
wrong
Yeah.
column.
Right.
So don't rethink them.
No.
and then what is your American Indian?
Just go one step farther beyond where you
Just
were at.
10.
But if,
You're gonna put that in.
I don't, do you need
He's
that?
gonna say it.
I already said it.
Well, we missed it. We got, if you want it recorded, you better say
Jeff
it again.
can, Jeff can tell
You
Brenda.
can say it. What?
If the target, if the American Indian population is less than 85% gifted and talented, then it will be added to management's response.
Okay.
going to take the job after all this?